It started like any other political debate segment: bright studio lights, polished talking points, and a press secretary ready to go to battle. Karoline Leavitt sat tall in her chair, her posture firm but relaxed, her voice confident as she made the case for Donald Trump. She had rehearsed her arguments, anticipated the usual tough questions, and was ready to defend every word. Her tone was sharp, her message clear, and for a moment, it seemed like she had full control of the segment. She gestured with precision, her eyes steady and locked onto the camera, not a hint of hesitation. This was her arena. But then, without warning, the host cut in mid-sentence, bluntly and without the usual polite buffer. "All right, we're going to stop you there," he said, his tone suddenly brisk. Karoline's words froze in her throat. Her expression didn't change immediately, but there was a flicker in her eyes, a flash of disbelief. She tried to interject, to finish her thought, but the host was already moving on. And then came the twist. "We've got Robert De Niro with us." Her brows lifted slightly. Did she hear that right? Robert De Niro? For a moment, it didn't even feel real. Was this a debate or a movie premiere? Her eyes widened just enough to show her surprise, but she quickly composed herself. Still, the internal reaction was impossible to miss. Seriously? They're replacing me mid-interview, with an actor? The screen split, and there he was, Robert De Niro, stone-faced, arms folded, radiating cinematic intensity as if he'd just walked off the set of The Irishman. The air in the studio seemed to shift. The message was clear: this wasn't just a guest, this was a political ambush dressed up as a celebrity cameo. Karoline sat still, her heart pounding faster now, not out of fear, but out of principle. She felt the burn of being dismissed, not for lack of substance, but for the sake of ratings. Her lips pressed together as she inhaled sharply through her nose, calculating. This wasn't just unfair, it was disrespectful. But if the host and De Niro thought she'd shrink back and stay quiet, they were about to be very, very wrong. At first, Karoline Leavitt sat in stunned silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come from confusion, but from sheer disbelief. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly as she processed what had just happened. She hadn't been cut off because she said something offensive or went off topic. No, she'd been sidelined for a celebrity. A Hollywood actor who didn't even pretend to understand the nuance of the conversation. It wasn't just disrespectful, it was insulting. Her heart pounded, but not from nerves. From indignation. For a brief second, she considered brushing it off. Smiling politely, nodding, playing along. But that wasn't who she was. She hadn't come onto this national program to be a side note. She was invited to speak, so she was going to speak. Straightening her posture, Karoline's expression shifted into something steely and precise. Gone was the pleasant media guest, in her place stood a woman who had taken too many media hits to flinch now. Her voice, when she finally spoke again, was calm but razor-sharp. "Well, it seems the producers thought it would be more valuable to bring on a man who plays pretend for a living," she began, each word slow and deliberate, her tone laced with just enough sarcasm to sting. "If I wanted acting, I'd go to Broadway. I thought this was a political show." The host blinked, startled. De Niro was silent, blinking at the camera as if trying to figure out what scene he'd stumbled into. Karoline leaned slightly forward, her confidence filling the space that had just moments ago been taken from her. "Mr. De Niro, with all due respect, you've made a name for yourself pretending to be tough guys on screen. But this isn't a movie. This is real life. And frankly," she cocked an eyebrow, "I don't take lectures on democracy from people who read scripts for a living." Then, with impeccable timing and just the right amount of dramatic flair, she dropped the line that would echo across social media for days. "You're out of lines, sir. Show's over. Ong het vi roy, bac. The host let out a nervous laugh. De Niro frowned, lips parting as if to respond, but nothing came. Karoline had seized back the narrative with surgical precision. And now, everyone was watching her, not the actor, not the anchor. Her. She knew what she had done. And judging by the stunned silence on set, so did they. The moment Karoline Leavitt fired back with her now iconic line, "Ong het vi roy, bac oi," the atmosphere in the studio cracked like thunder. It was as if someone had yanked the needle off a record. Everyone froze. The audience, the crew, the moderators, all stunned into silence. Even Robert De Niro, a man known for his intimidating presence and decades of screen authority, blinked, his mouth slightly agape as if he hadn't heard her right. But he had. Everyone had. Leavitt's voice had been sharp but calm, cutting through the room like a scalpel. Her words didn't just challenge De Niro's authority, they dismissed it outright. And she knew exactly what she was doing. In that instant, she had seized control of the moment, flipping the power dynamic like a seasoned chess master moving a queen to check. Inside, her adrenaline surged, but she kept her expression composed, allowing only the faintest smirk to tug at the corner of her lips. She leaned slightly forward, her posture poised and confident, while De Niro recoiled just a hair in his seat, a subtle, involuntary twitch that betrayed the hit he'd just taken. It wasn't just the words, it was the delivery. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made it personal. But somehow, it landed with the weight of a mic drop that echoed through every corner of the room. Behind the scenes, producers exchanged looks. Someone whispered, "Holy hell," under their breath. On social media, the clip had already gone viral within minutes, bouncing from Twitter to TikTok to Facebook, each repost captioned with some variation of, "She ended him." Memes spawned in real time, photoshopping Leavitt into action movie posters, gladiator arenas, and courtroom dramas where she was clearly the victor. Karoline, meanwhile, remained still. The pressure was mounting around her, but she felt oddly clear-headed, like she was in the eye of the storm. She had come into the segment prepared to be interrupted, spoken over, or dismissed. She had practiced patience, built rebuttals, and reminded herself that the only thing she truly needed to do was hold her ground. But she hadn't just held it, she'd claimed it. Boldly. Fearlessly. De Niro struggled to respond. His face, once animated with smug certainty, now flickered with frustration and disbelief. Whatever talking points he had lined up, whatever zingers he was hoping to land, it was too late. The momentum had shifted. He opened his mouth to speak, but paused, realizing that anything he said now would only seem like a bitter afterthought. His moment had passed, and everyone knew it. Karoline didn't need to say another word. The silence was louder than anything she could have added. Her expression remained neutral, her eyes steady, assertive without being aggressive. She wasn't trying to win applause. She was making a point, and she had made it flawlessly. And outside, the world was buzzing. As the studio door swung shut behind her, Karoline Leavitt inhaled deeply, her chest rising and falling as if she had just emerged from underwater. The backstage corridor, dimly lit and far quieter than the set she had just left, felt like another world entirely. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, and the hum of the building's air conditioning filled the silence. But Karoline barely noticed. Her pulse was still thundering in her ears, adrenaline rushing through her veins like wildfire. She walked with slow, deliberate steps, heels clicking against the concrete floor with a rhythm that mirrored her racing thoughts. Every step was an effort to ground herself. She had just stared down Robert De Niro, an acting legend, a cultural icon, and not only had she held her own, she had landed a blow that would echo far beyond the studio walls. "You're out of lines, sir, your script's done." The words replayed in her head like a loop, crisp and clear. She hadn't planned to say it. It wasn't on any note card or prep memo. It came from somewhere deeper, an instinct, sharp and primal, forged in years of being underestimated. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her phone, unlocking it with a swipe. Notifications poured in like a flood, text messages, missed calls, mentions exploding across social media. Her teen was in full-blown frenzy. "That was iconic, you broke the internet, call me ASAP." A part of her wanted to laugh, another part wanted to scream. But most of all, she felt something powerful, something unfamiliar. It wasn't just relief. It was something close to glory. Karoline stopped in front of a framed poster on the wall, an old photo of past guests who had sat in that very studio. Legends, all of them. And now, her. Not an actress, not a media darling, but a political strategist, a young woman who refused to be patronized, belittled, or silenced. She stared at her reflection in the glass of the frame, studying the steel in her eyes, the faint curve of her lip. She didn't look like someone who had just been ambushed. She looked like someone who had taken the ambush and turned it into a victory parade. The door at the end of the hallway opened, and a production assistant peeked out, looking both nervous and impressed. "Miss Leavitt, your car's ready," he said. Karoline nodded politely, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, her movements smooth and composed. "Thank you," she replied, voice calm but charged with a new energy. Not forced confidence, earned confidence. As she made her way to the exit, she caught whispers behind her, crew members murmuring, a cameraman chuckling, "She really said that to Niro?" Another replied, "He didn't even see it coming." And he hadn't. That was the point. Everyone expected her to falter. But Karoline Leavitt had flipped the script, quite literally. And as she stepped into the cool night air outside the studio, she knew this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. The camera had stopped rolling, but her moment? It had only just started. By the time Karoline Leavitt stepped into her apartment that evening, the world outside had shifted. She hadn't even changed out of her blazer when the flood of messages began. Her phone pinged nonstop, friends, colleagues, complete strangers. Some were laughing, others cheering, a few stunned silent, as if they had just witnessed a political glitch in the Matrix. The infamous line, "You're out of lines, sir, your script's done," was already echoing across the internet like a call to arms. Karoline sank into her couch, finally allowing herself to exhale. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was ebbing, replaced by a complex mix of exhaustion, awe, and, if she was honest, a giddy kind of disbelief. She hadn't planned it. She didn't walk into that CNN interview intending to clash with a Hollywood legend. But when Robert De Niro leaned forward with that smug theatrical grin, she felt something snap, not in anger, but in clarity. This wasn't just politics anymore. It was performance. And she was tired of pretending that people like him got to write the script. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked her phone. Twitter was ablaze. TikToks were already popping up, clips of the confrontation overlaid with dramatic music, slow-motion edits, memes that cast her as a real-life action heroine. One user dubbed her the Meryl Streep of comebacks. Another wrote, "Karoline Leavitt just turned a De Niro scene into her origin story." She couldn't help but laugh. It was absurd, but also a little thrilling. And yet, beneath the humor and noise, something deeper stirred in her chest. A sense of validation she didn't often allow herself to feel. She had spent years being underestimated, too young, too polished, too composed. Dismissed as a talking head, or worse, as someone reciting lines written by others. But tonight, that narrative cracked wide open. People had seen her, really seen her, and they were listening. Still, she knew the tide could turn just as quickly. Virality was a double-edged sword. The same headlines praising her could just as easily twist against her. But in this moment, she didn't care. She wasn't writing a trend, she was redefining her role. No longer the sidekick in someone else's scene. She was the one delivering the punchline. Karoline stood up, pulled off her blazer, and walked to the mirror. She looked at her reflection, tired but glowing with something fiercer than confidence. Purpose. Fire. Her smile returned, this time slower, deeper, like someone who'd realized she didn't need permission to take the spotlight. From this night forward, she wouldn't just be remembered for the comeback. She'd be known as the woman who rewrote the script and handed De Niro his final curtain.